Hello everyone, welcome back to the My Fluency Journey, and this live session is about book reading. So yeah, we are currently reading The Sapiens. So we are on chapter 16, right? The Capitalist Creed, and the topic is In the Name of Capital. So yeah, we'll start reading. So yeah, in the okay, in the name of capital, the nationalization of Indonesia by Dutch Crown and of India by British Crown hardly ended the embrace of capitalism and empire. Embrace means when we say something good about something, right? Embrace. We embrace this, right? So yeah. So this is what is the meaning of embrace is. Let me increase. Let me increase the font size. Embrace. To hold someone closely in your arms, to accept something willingly or enthusiastically, to include or contain something as a part of whole, a warm hug or act of holding. So we get into acceptance or adaptation of idea. Adaptation or reject. Adaptation of idea, right? Okay, adaptation of capitalism and empire. On the contrary is a very useful term we use in English. It's, means otherwise, or like in get the Hindi meaning. On the contrary meaning. Contradictory or opposing idea. Conversely, in contrast. On the contrary means in contrast. Okay, got it. The connection only grew stronger during 19th century. Joint stock companies no longer needed to establish and govern private colonies. The managers and large shareholders now pulled the string of power in London, Amsterdam, and Paris, and they could count on the state to look after their interests. As Marx and other social critics could, it is could, Quippd. What is could, right? We need to understand it. Make a witty or clever remark. Quipped is joked. Western governments were becoming a capitalist union. The most notorious example of how government led the bidding of big money was the First Opium War fought between Britain and China in 1840 to 1842. In the first half of the 19th century, the British East India Company and sundry British businesses people made fortunes by exporting drugs, particularly opium, to China. Millions of Chinese became addicts, debilitating the country, and both economically and socially debilitating. Debilitating. Debilitating, right? It weakens or impairs strengths, causing serious weakness. Debilitating means weakens. One, two. Both economically and socially. In late 1830s, the Chinese government issued a ban on drug trafficking, but British drug merchants simply ignored the law. Chinese authorities began to confiscate and destroy confiscate. Stop. Right. Confiscate. Confiscate. Confiscate means to take to seize property or to seize something, right? And destroy drug cargoes. The drug cartels had close connection in Westminster and Downing Street. Many MPs and cabinet ministers, in fact, held stock in the drug company, so they pressured the government to take action. In 1840, Britain duly declared war on China in the name of free trade. It was a walkover. The overconfident Chinese were so matched for Britain's new underwater weapons, steamboats, heavy artillery, rockets, and rapid-fire rifles. Under the subsequent peace treaty, China agreed not to constrain the activities of British drug merchants and to compensate them for damages inflicted by Chinese police. Furthermore, the British demanded and received control of Hong Kong, which they proceeded to use as a secure base for drug trafficking. Hong Kong remained in British hands until 1997. In the late 19th century, about 40 million Chinese, a tenth of country's population, were opium addicts. Egypt too learned to respect the long arm of British capitalism. During the 19th century, French and British investors lent huge sums to the rulers of Egypt, first in order to finance the Suez Canal project and later to fund far successful enterprises. Egyptians' debt swelled, and European creditors increasingly meddled in meddled. Swelled is swelling, right? And meddled in Egyptian affairs. M-E-double-D. M-E-double-D. M-E-double-D-L-E-D. To infer without investigation, interfere. In 1881, Egyptian nationalists had enough and rebelled. They declared a unilateral abrogation of all foreign debt. Abrogation. The act of officially ending and annulling something. Example: treaty abrogation marked a turning point in diplomatic relations. Repeal, revocation, nullification. Okay. Repeal a law or repeal, revocation, nullification. Of all foreigners. Queen Victoria was not amused. A year later, she dispersed her army and never to the Nile, and Egypt remained a British protectorate until after the Second World War. These were hardly only war fought in the interest of investors. In fact, the war itself could become a commodity, just like opium. In 1821, the Greeks rebelled against the Ottoman Empire. The uprising aroused great sympathy in liberal and romantic circles in Britain. Lord Byron, the poet, even went to Greece to fight alongside the insurgents. Insurgents were rising in active revolt against established authority. Rebels. But London financiers saw an opportunity as well. They proposed to the rebels leader the issue of tradable Greek rebellion bonds on the London Stock Exchange. The Greeks would promise to repay the bond plus interest, and when they won their independence, private investors were bound to make a profit or out of sympathy for the Greek cause for both. The value of Greek rebellion bonds rose and fell on the London Stock Exchange in tempo with military success and failures on the battlefields of Hellas. The Turks gradually gained the upper hand, with the rebel defeat imminent, and bondholders faced the prospect of losing their trousers. The bondholders' interests over the national interests, so the British organized an international fleet that, in 1827, sank the main Ottoman flotilla in the Battle of Navarino. After centuries of subjugation, Greece was finally free, but freedom came with a huge debt that the new country had no way of repaying. The Greek economy was mortgaged to Britain creditors for decades. Okay, mortgage, right? To use property as collateral for loan was mortgage. The bear hug between capital and politics has had far-reaching implications for the credit market. The amount of credit in an economy is determined not only by purely economic factors such as discovery of new oil field or the invention of new machine, but also by political events such as regime changes or more ambitious foreign policies. Ambitious is strange or strong desire to achieve success. Ambitious project. This is my very ambitious project. Extraordinary, aspiring, determined. Okay. After the Battle of Navarino, British capitalists were not willing to invest their money in risky overseas deal. They had seen that if a foreign debtor refused to repay loans, the British army would get their money back. This is why today a country's credit rating is far more important to its economic well-being than are its natural resources. Credit rating indicate the probability that a country will pay its debts. In addition to purely economic data, they take into account political, social, and even cultural factors. An oil-rich country goes with a despotic government, endemic warfare, and a corrupt judicial system will usually receive a low credit rating. As a result, it is likely to remain relatively poor since it will not be able to raise the necessary capital to make the most of its oil bounty. A country devoid of natural resources but which enjoys peace, a fair judicial system, and a free government is likely to receive high credit rating. As such, it may be able to raise enough cheap capitals to support a good education system and foster a flourishing high-tech industry. Despotic means something related to something bad, right? Something bad government or something corrupt government. Means where one person or group holds unchecked authority and often uses tyrannical, authoritarian, dictatorial. The cult of the free market. Now the next topic is the cult of the free market. Capital and politics influence each other to such an extent that their relations are hotly debated by economists, politicians, and the general public alike. Ardent capitalists tend to agreeable. Ardent means agreeable, right? Okay, let's search it. Argue that capital should be free to influence politics, but politics should not be allowed to influence capital. Enthusiastic, passionate. Okay, passionate. Ardent is not this. But politics should not be allowed to influence capital. They argue that when government interfere in the market, political interests cause them to make unwise investments that result in slower growth. For example, a government may impose heavy taxation on industrialists and use the money to give lavish unemployment benefits, which are popular with voters. And in the view of many business people, it would be far better if the government left the money with them. They would use it, they claim, to open new factories and hire the unemployed. In this view, the wisest economic policy is to keep politics out of the economy, reduce taxation and government regulation to a minimum, and allow market forces free rein to take the course. Private investors, unencumbered by political consideration, will invest their money where they can get the most profit. So the way to ensure the most economic growth will benefit everyone. Encumbered, unencumbered, unencumbered, unencumbered is a not burdened or weighed down, free of debt. Okay, so yeah, will will invest their money where they can get the most profit. So the way to ensure the most economic growth will benefit everyone, industrialists and workers, is for the government to do as little as possible. This free market doctrine is today the most common and influential variant of the capitalist creed. The most enthusiastic advocates of the free market criticize military adventures abroad with much zeal as much enthusiasm, as well as welfare programs at home. They offer government the same advice that Zen master offer initiate, just do nothing. But in but in its extreme form, belief in the market is as naive as belief in Santa Claus. There simply is no such thing as a market free of all politic bias. The most important economic sources resources trust in the future, and this resource is constantly threatened by thieves and charlatans. Markets by themselves offer no protection against fraud, thefts, and violence. It is the job of the political system to ensure trust by legislating sanction against cheats and to establish and support police forces, courts, and jails which will enforce the law. When kings fail to do so, their job and regulate the market properly, it leads to loss of trust, dwindling credit, and economic depression. And that was the lesson taught by the Mississippi bubble of 1719, and anyone who forgot it reminded by the US housing bubble of 2007 and the ensuing crunch credit crunch and recession. Ensuing crunch. Ensuing credit crunch में रहेंगे. Refer to the financial situation that follows a triggered situation where access to loan and credit becomes heavily restricted. Happening as a result of something. Happening as a what it means in context. Lender becomes risk averse. Interest become highs. Tighten their lending standards. Tighten their lending standards. Now the next topic of this chapter is the capitalist hell. There is an even more fundamental reason why it's dangerous to give market to completely free. Adam Smith thought that shoemaker would use his surplus to employ more assistants. This implies that egoistic greed is beneficial for all since profits are utilized to expand production and hire more employers. Yet, what happens if the greedy shoemaker increases profit by paying employees less and increasing their work hours? The answer is that the free market will protect the employers. If a shoemaker pays too little and demand too much, the best employee would naturally abandon him and go to the work for his competitor. The trained shoemaker. The trained shoemaker would find himself left with the worst laborers or with no labor at all. He would have to mend his way or to go out of business. His own greed would compel him to treat his employees well. This sounds bulletproof in theory, but in practice, the bullets get through all too easily. In a completely free market, unsupervised by kings and priests, various capitalists can establish monopolies or collude against their workforces. If there is a single corporation controlling all shoe factories in a country, or if all factory owners conspire to reduce wages simultaneously, then the laborers are no longer able to protect themselves by switching jobs. Avaricious. 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 Extremely greedy for material gain. Collude. Secretly cooperate with this. Deceitful, illegal. Or okay. Even worse, greedy bosses might curtail the workers' freedom. Curtail means stop or cut from. Curtail stop the workers' freedom from movement through debt, peonage, or slavery. At the end of Middle Age, slavery was almost unknown in Christian Europe. During the early modern period, the rise of European capitalism went hand in hand with the rise of Atlantic slave trade. Unrestrained market forces rather than tyrannical kings or racist ideologies were responsible for this calamity. When the Europeans conquered America, they opened gold and silver mines and established sugar at prohibitive prices. Prohibitive means very expensive, right? Prohibitive prices and used sparingly as a secret ingredient in delicacies and snake oil medicines. After large sugar plantations were established in America, ever increasing amount of sugar began to reach Europe. The price of sugar dropped in Europe, developed an insatiable tweet suit. Too expensive, right? Insatiable. Insatiable is used most Means this word is used so many times in this book. Okay, endless cravings, insatiable suit, unstoppable, greedy, greedy suit, loved greedy. Entrepreneurs met this need by producing huge quantities of sweets, cakes, cookies, chocolate, candy, and sweetened beverages such as cocoa, coffee, and tea. The annual sugar intake of the average Englishman rose from near zero in early 17th century to around 8 kilograms in the year 19th century. However, growing cane and extracting its sugar was a labor-intensive business. Few people wanted to work long hours and malaria infested sugar fields under a tropical sun. Contract laborers would have produced a commodity too expensive for mass production. Mass consumption. Sensitive to market forces and greedy for profits and economic growth, European plantation owners switched to slaves. From the 16th to the 19th century, about 10 million African slaves were imported to America. About 70% of them worked on the sugar plantation. Labor conditions were abominable, 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 abo, abominable, 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 yeah, means very extremely worse conditions, right? Abominable, that means more revolting, just very poor in quality, or uh, conditions were atrocious, extremely bad, right? Most slaves lived a short and miserable life, and millions more died during wars waged to capture slaves or during the long voyage from Inner Africa to the shores of America. All this so that Europeans could enjoy their sweet tea and candy, and sugar barons could enjoy huge profits. The slave trade was not controlled by any state or government. It was purely economic enterprise organized and financed by the free market according to the laws of supply and demand. Private slave trading companies sold shares on the Amsterdam, London, and Paris stock exchanges. Middle class Europeans looking for a good investment bought these shares. Relying on this money, the companies bought ship, hired sailors and soldiers, purchased slaves in Africa, and transport them to America. There they sold the slave to the plantation owners using the proceeds to purchase plantation products such as sugar, cocoa, coffee, tobacco, cotton, rum. They returned to Europe, sold the sugar and cotton for a good price, and they sailed to Africa to begin another round. The shareholders were very pleased with the arrangement. Throughout the 18th century, the yield on slave trade invention was about 6% a year. They were extremely profitable, as any modern consultant would be quick to admit. This is the fly in the ointment of free market. Fly in the ointment. Fly in the ointment. Ointment. Okay. And it is an idiom that refers to a small flaw or problem that spoils an otherwise good situation. A phrase comes from the Bible, specifically this. Okay. So what's the meaning? Drawback. This is a drawback of the free market capitalism. It cannot ensure that profits are gained in a fair way or distributed in a fair manner. On the contrary, the craving to increase profits and production blind people to anything that might stand in the way. When growth becomes a supreme good, unrestricted by any other ethical consideration, it can easily lead to catastrophe. Some religions, such as Christianity and Nazism, have killed millions out of burning hatred. Capitalism has killed millions out of cold indifference coupled with greed. The Atlantic slave trade from did not stem from racist hatred toward Africans. The individuals who bought the shares, the brokers who sold them, and the managers of the slave trade companies really thought about the Africans. Nor did the owners of the sugar plantations. Many owners lived far from their plantation, and the only information they demanded were neat ledgers of profits and losses. It is important to remember that Atlantic slave trade was not a single aberration and otherwise spotless record. Aberration, a single aberration in an otherwise spotless record. Aberration. Also, aberration. It's not a single event in single event or departure. Okay. Single anomaly. The Great Bengal famine discussed in the previous chapter was caused by a similar dynamic. The British East India Company cared more about its profit than about the lives of 10 million Bengalis. VOCs Military campaigns in Indonesia were financed by upstanding Dutch burghers who allowed their children give to charity and enjoyed good music and fine art, but had no regard for the suffering of inhabitants of Java, Sumatra, and Malacca. Countless other crimes and misdemeanor accompanied the growth of the modern economy in other part of the planet. The 19th century brought no improvement in the ethics of capitalism. The Industrial Revolution that swept through Europe enriched the bankers and capital owners, but condemned millions of workers to a life of abject poverty. In the European colonies, things were even worse. In 1876, the King Leopold II of Belgium set up a non-governmental humanitarian organization with the declared aim of exploring Central Africa and fighting the slave trade along the Congo River. It was charged with improving conditions for inhabitants of the region by building roads, schools, and hospitals. In 1885, the European power agreed to give this organization control of 2.3 million square kilometers in the Congo Basin. This territory, 75 times the size of Belgium, was henceforth known as the Congo Free State. And nobody asked the opinion of the territory's 20-30 million inhabitants. Within a short time, the humanitarian organization became a business enterprise whose real aim was growth and profit. The schools and hospitals were forgotten, and the Congo Basin was instead filled with mines and plantations, run by mostly Belgian officials who ruthlessly exploited the local population. The rubber industry was particularly notorious. Rubber was fast becoming an industrial staple, and rubber export was the Congo's most important source of income. The African villagers who collected the rubber were required to provide higher and higher quotas. Those who failed to deliver their quotas were punished brutally for their laziness. Their arms were chopped off, and occasionally entire villages were massacred. According to the most moderate estimates, between 1885 and 1908, the pursuit of growth and the profit cost the lives of 6 million individuals, about 20% of the Congo's population. Some estimates reach up to 10 million deaths. In recent decades, and especially after 1945, the capitalist greed was somewhat reined in. Rein, rein in. Okay. Not least due to the fear of communism. Too slow or stop efforts. Too slow. Due to the fear of communism. Yet inequities are still rampant. The economic pie of 20,000, 2014 is far larger than the pie of 15,000, but it is distributed so unevenly that many African peasants and Indonesian laborers return home after a hard day's work with less food than did their ancestors 500 years ago. Much like the agricultural revolution, so too the growth of modern economy might turn out to be a colossal fraud. Modern economy to be a colossal fraud. The human species and the global economy may well keep growing, but many more individuals may live in hunger and want. Capitalism has two answers to this criticism. First, capitalism has created a world that nobody but a capitalist is capable of running. The only serious attempt to manage the world differently, communism, was much worse in almost every conceivable way that nobody has the stomach to try again. In 8500 BC, one could cry bitter tears over the agricultural revolution, but it was too late to give up agriculture. Similarly, we're not like capitalism, but we cannot live without it. The second answer is that we need. The second answer is that we just need more patience. Paradise, the capitalist promise, is right around the corner. True, mistakes have been made, such as Atlantic slave trade and the exploitation of European working class. But we have learned our lesson, and if we just wait a little longer and allow the pie to grow a little bigger, everybody will receive a fatter slice. The division of spoil will never be equitable, but there will be enough to satisfy every man, woman, and child, even in Congo. There are indeed some positive signs. At least when we use purely material criteria such as life expectancy, child mortality, and calorie intake, the standard of living of the average human in 2014 is significantly higher than it was in 1914, despite the exponential growth in the number of humans. Yet, can the economic pie grow indefinitely? Every pie requires raw material and energy. Prophets of doom warn that sooner or later Homo sapiens will exhaust the raw material and energy of the planet Earth, and what will happen then? No one knows what will happen then. Okay. Now we are on the 17th chapter, the wheels of industry, right? So yeah, this is 17th chapter. The modern economy grows thanks to our most thanks to. So what we learn in the 16th chapter? We mostly learn about capitalism, how capitalism changed the entire means how capitalism changed human thinking? The wheels of industry, right? So the modern economy grows thanks to our most trust in the future and to the willingness of capitalists to reinvent their profit in production. These two are the most basic faith, most basic faith of humans in in this capitalist society, in this capitalist society. Yet that does not suffice. Economic growth also requires energy and raw material, and these are finite. When, when and if they run out, the entire system will collapse. But the evidence provided by the past is that they are finite only in theory. Counterintuitively, while humankind use of energy and raw material has mushroomed in the last few centuries, the amount available for our exploitation have actually increased. Whenever a shortage of either has threatened to slow economic growth, investments have flowed into scientific and technological research. These have invariably produced not only more efficient ways of exploiting existing resources but also completely new types of energy and material. Right? Consider the vehicle industry. Over the last 300 years, humankind has manufactured billions of vehicles, from cars and wheelbarrows to trains, cars, supersonic jets, and space shuttles. One might have expected that such a prodigious effort would have exhausted the energy resources and raw material available for vehicle production, and today we would be scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yet the opposite is the case. Whereas in 1700 the global vehicle industry relied overwhelmingly on wood and iron, today it has at its disposal a cornucopia of newfound materials such as plastic, rubber, aluminium, titanium, none of which our ancestors even knew about. Whereas in 1700 cars were built mainly by the muscle power of carpenters, smiths, today the machines in Toyota, Boeing factories were powered by petroleum combustion engines and nuclear power stations. A similar revolution has swept almost all other fields of industry. We call it the Industrial Revolution. For millennia prior to the Industrial Revolution, humans already knew how to make use of a large variety of energy resources. They burned wood in order to smelt iron, heat houses, and bake cakes. Sailing ships harnessed wind power to move around, and watermill captured the flow of river to grind grain. Yet, all these had clear limits and problems. Trees were not available everywhere, and the wind didn't always blow when you needed. And water power was only useful if you lived near a river. An even bigger problem was that people didn't know how to convert one type of energy into another. They could harness the movement of wind and water to sail ship and push milestones, but not to heat water or smelt iron. Conversely, they could not use the heat energy produced by the burning wood to make a milestone move. Humans had only one machine capable of performing such energy conversion tricks: the body. In the natural process of metabolism, the bodies of humans and other animal burns organic fuels known as a food and convert the released energy into movement of muscles. Man, woman, and beast could consume grain and meat, burn up their carbohydrates and fats, and use the energy to haul a rickshaw or pull a plug. To haul a rickshaw, right? To pull something very heavy. Since human and animal bodies were the only energy conversion device available, muscle power was the key to almost all human activities. Human muscles built cars and houses. Ox muscles plugged fields, and horse muscles transported goods. The energy that fueled these organic muscle machines came ultimately from a single source: plants. Plants in their turn obtained their energy from the sun. By the process of photosynthesis, they captured solar energy and packed it into organic compounds. Almost everything people did throughout history was fueled by the solar energy that was captured by plants and converted into muscle power. Okay, human history was consequently dominated by two main cycles: the growth cycle of plants and the changing cycle of solar energy, day and night, summer and winter. When sunlight was scarce, and when wheat fields were still green, human had little energy. Granaries were empty, tax collections were idle, soldiers found it difficult to move and fight, and kings tended to keep the peace. When the sun shone brightly and the wheat ripened, Peasants harvested the crops and filled the granaries. Tax collectors buried to take share. Soldiers flexed their muscles and sharpened their swords. Kings conveyed counsel and planned their next campaign. Everyone was fueled by solar energy, captured and packaged in wheat, rice, and potatoes. Okay, the next topic in this chapter is the secret in the kitchen. The secret in the kitchen. The secret in the kitchen. Throughout these long millennia, day in and day out, okay, people stood face to face with the most important invention in the history of energy production and failed to notice it. It stared them in the eye every time a housewife or servant put a kettle to boil water for tea or put a pot full of potatoes on the stove. The minute the water boiled, the lid of the kettle or the pot jumped. Heat was being converted to movement. But the jumping pot lids were an annoyance, especially if you forgot the pot on the stove and the water boiled over. Nobody saw their real potential. A partial breakthrough in converting heat into movement, followed by the invention of gunpowder in 19th century. Oh, in 9th century. 9th century China, at the first, the idea of using gunpowder to propel projectile was so counterintuitive that for centuries gunpowder was used primarily to produce fire bombs, but eventually, perhaps after some bomb expert, bomb expert ground gunpowder in a mortar only to have the pestle shoot out with force. Guns made their appearance. About 600 years passed between the invention of gunpowder and the development of effective artillery. Even then, the idea of converting heat into motion remained so counterintuitive that another 3 centuries went by before people invented the next machine that used heat to move things around. The new technology was born in British coal mines. As the British population swelled, forests were cut down to fuel the growing economy and make way of houses and fields. Britain suffered from an increasing shortage of firewood. It began burning coal as a substitute. Many coal seams were located in waterlogged areas and flooding prevented miners from accessing the lower strata of mines. It was a problem looking for a solution. Around 1700, a strange noise began reverberating around British mine shafts. That noise, harbinger of the Industrial Revolution, was subtle at first, but it grew louder and louder with each passing decade until it developed the entire world in a deafening cacophony. Cacophony. It emanated from a steam engine. It emanated from a steam engine. Okay, it developed the steam engine. Cacophony. 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 In a deafening cacophony. Harsh, jarring mixture of sounds. Chaotic and unpleasant to hear. Emanated. Emanated. Come out from a source or radiate. There are many types of steam engines, but they are all share one common principle. You burn some kind of fuel such as coal and use the resulting heat to boil down, producing steam. As the steam expands, it pushes the piston. The piston pushes, the piston moves, and anything that is connected to the piston moves with it. You have converted heat into movement. In 18th century British coal mines, the piston was connected to a pump that extracted water from the bottom of the mine shafts. The earliest engines were incredibly inefficient. You needed to burn a huge load of coal in order to pump out even a tiny amount of water. But in the mine, coal was plentiful and close at hand, and nobody cared. In the decades that followed, British entrepreneurs improved the efficiency of the steam engines, brought it out to mine shafts, and connected to the looms and kilns. This revolutionized textile production and making it possible to produce ever large quantities of cheap textiles in the blink of an eye. Britain became the workshop of the world. But even more importantly, getting the steam engine out of the mines broke an important psychological barrier. If you could burn coal in order to move textile looms, why not use the Mason method to move other things such as vehicles? In 1825, a British engineer connected a steam engine to a train of nine wagons full of coal. 9 wagons full of coal. The engine drew the wagon along an iron rail, some 20 kilometers long from the mine to the nearest harbor. This was the first steam-powered locomotive in history. Clearly, if its steam could be used to transport coal, why not other goods? And why not even people? On 15th September 1830, the first commercial railway line was opened, connecting Liverpool and with Manchester. The train moves under the same steam power that had previously pumped water and moved textile looms. A mere 20 years later, Britain has had ten of thousands of kilometers of railway tracks. Henceforth, people became obsessed with the idea that machines and engines could be used to convert one type of energy into another. But any type of energy anywhere in the world might be harnessed to whatever need we had if we just invent the right machine. For example, when physicists realized that an immense amount of energy stored within atoms, they immediately started thinking about how this energy could be released and used to make electricity, power submarines, and annihilate cities. 600 years passed between the moment Chinese alchemists discovered gunpowder and the moment Turkish cannon pulverized the walls of Constantinople. Pulverized. To crush. Only 40 years passed between the moment Einstein determined that any kind of mass could be converted into energy. That's what E is equal to mc square means, and the moment atom bombs obliterated Hiroshima and the Nagasaki, and the nuclear power station mushroomed all over the globe. Another crucial discovery was the internal combustion engine, which took little more than a generation to revolutionize human transportation and turn petroleum into liquid political power. Petroleum had been known for thousands of years and was used to waterproof roofs and lubricate axles. Yet, until a century ago, nobody thought it was useful for much more than that. The idea of spilling blood for the sake of oil would have seemed ludicrous. 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 You might fight a war over land, gold, paper, slaves, but not oil. This is absurd or foolish. Okay. The carrier. The carrier of electricity was more startling yet. The carrier of the career of electricity was more startling yet. 2 centuries ago, electricity played no role in the economy and was used at most for arcane scientific experiments and cheap magic tricks. A series of inventions turned it into a universal genie in a lamp. We flick our fingers and it prints book and sweet clothes, keep our vegetable fresh and our screen frozen, cook our dinner and execute our criminals, registers our thoughts and record our smile, light up our nights and entertain us with countless television shows. Few of us understand how electricity does all these things, but even fewer can imagine life without it. Okay, so the importance of electricity, the importance of coal, the importance of machines. This is what all about industrial revolution. The next topic is an ocean of energy. At heart, the industrial revolution has been a revolution in energy conversion. It has demonstrated again and again that there is no limit to the amount of energy at our disposal, or more precisely, that the only limit is set by our ignorance. Every few decades, we discover a new energy source so that sum total of energy at our disposal just keeps growing. Why are so many people afraid that we are running out of energy? Why do they warn of disaster if you exist all available fossil fuels? Clearly, the world doesn't lack energy. All we lack is the knowledge necessary to harness and convert it to our needs. Okay, the amount of energy stored in all the fossil fuels on the earth is negligible compared to the amount that the sun dispenses every day free of charge. Only a tiny portion of the sun's energy reaches, yet it amounts to 3 crore, 3,766,800 exajoules of energy each year. A joule is a unit of energy in the metric system. About the a half apple meter straight up. An exajoule is a billion joules. It's a lot of apples. All the world's plant captures only about 3,000 of those solar exajoules through the process of photosynthesis. All human activities and industries put together consume about 500 exajoules annually, equivalent to the amount of energy Earth receives from the sun in just 90 minutes. And that's only solar energy. In addition, we are surrounded by the enormous sources of energy, such as nuclear energy and gravitational energy. The latter most evident in the power of ocean tide caused by the moon's pull on the Earth. Prior to industrial revolution, the human energy market was almost completely dependent on plants. People lived alongside a green energy reservoir carrying 3,000 exajoules a year and tried to pump as much of its energy as they could. Yet these was a clear limit to how much they could extract. During the Industrial Revolution, we came to realize that we are actually living alongside an enormous ocean of energy, one holding billion upon billion of exajoules of potential power. All we need to do is invest better pumps, learning how to harness and convert energy efficiently, effectively solve the problems that slows economic growth. The scarcity of raw material. As humans work out how to harness large quantities of cheap energy, they could begin exploiting previously inaccessible deposits of raw material, for example, mining iron in Siberian wastelands, or transporting raw material from even more distant locations, for example, supplying a British textile mill with Australian wool. Simultaneously, breaking scientific breakthroughs enabled humankind to invent completely new raw materials such as plastic and discover previously unknown natural materials such as silicon, aluminium. Chemists discovered aluminium only in 1820s, but separating from the metal from its ore was extremely difficult and costly. For decades, aluminum was much more expensive than gold. In 1860s, Emperor Napoleon III of France commissioned aluminum cutlery to be laid out of his most distinguished guests. Less imported visitors had to make do with gold knives and forks, but at the end of the 19th century, chemists discovered a way to extract immense amount of cheap aluminum, and current global production stands at 30 million tons per year. Napoleon III would be surprised to hear that his subject descendants used cheap disposable aluminum foil to wrap their sandwich and put their leftovers. 2000 years ago, when people in the Mediterranean basin suffered from dry skin, they smeared olive oil on their hand. Today, they open a tube of hand cream. Below is the list of ingredients of a simple modern hand cream that I bought at a local store. Deionized water, stearic acid, glycerin, capricitylic glyceride, propylene, glycol, isopropyl mesylate, Pananax, ginseng root extract, fragrance, cetyl alcohol, triethanolamine, dimeticon. These are useless. Almost all of these ingredients were invented or discovered in the last 2 centuries. During the First World War, Germany was placed under blockade and suffered severe shortage of raw material, in particular saltpeter, an essential ingredient, and gunpowder and other explosives. The most important saltpeter deposits were in China and India. There were none at all in Germany. True, saltpeter could be replaced by ammonia, but it was expensive to produce as well. Luckily for Germany, one of their fellow citizens, a Jewish chemist named Fritz Haber, had discovered in 1908 a process of producing ammonia literally out of thin air. When war broke out, the Germans used Haber's discovery to commence industrial production of explosives using air as a raw material. Some scholars believe that if it hadn't been for Haber's discovery, Germany would have been forced to surrender long before. November 1918, the discovery won Haber, who during the discovery won Haber a Nobel Prize in 1918 in chemistry, not in peace, who during the war also pioneered the use of poison gas in battle. Okay, so yeah. Now the next topic is on this chapter. Now the next topic in this chapter is the life on the conveyor belt. The Industrial Revolution yielded an unprecedented combination of cheap and abundant energy and cheap and abundant raw materials. The result was an explosion in human productivity. The explosion was felt first and foremost in agriculture. Usually, when we think of the Industrial Revolution, we think of an urban landscape of smoking chimneys or the plight of. Okay, let me drink some water. Okay. If you think of an urban scap, smoking chimney, the plight of exploited coal miners sweating in the bowl of earth. Yet the Industrial Revolution was above all else the second agricultural revolution. During the last 200 years, industrial production method became the mainstay of agriculture. Machines such as tractors began to undertake tasks that were previously performed by muscle power or not performed at all. Fields and animals became vastly more productive thanks to the artificial fertilizers, industrial insecticides, and an entire arsenal of hormones and medications. Refrigerator, ships, and airplanes have made it possible to store produce for months, and it transported quickly and cheaply to the other side of the world. Europeans began to dine on fresh Argentinian beef and Japanese sushi. Even plants and animals were mechanized. Around the time that Homo sapiens were elevated to advanced status of humanistic religions, farm animals stopped being viewed as a living creature that could feel pain and distress and instead came to be treated as machines. Today, these animals are often mass produced in a factory like facilities, their bodies shaped in accordance with industrial needs. They pass their entire lives as cogs in a giant production line, and the length and quality of their existence is determined by the profits and the losses of business corporations. Even when the industry takes care to keep them alive, reasonably healthy and well fed, it has no interesting interest in the animal's social and psychological needs, except when these have a direct impact on production. Egg laying hens, for example, have a complex world of behavioral needs and drives. They feel strong urges to scout their environment, forage, and peck around, determine social hierarchies, build nests, and groom themselves. But the egg industry often locks the hens inside tiny coops, and it is not uncommon for it to squeeze four hens to a cage, each given a floor space of about 25 by 25 centimeters. The hens receive sufficient food, but they are unable to claim a territory but build a nest or engage in other natural activities. Indeed, the cage is so small that hens are often unable even to flap their wings or stand fully erect. Pigs are among the most intelligent and inquisitive of mammals, second perhaps only to the great apes. Yet, industrialized pig farm routinely confine nursing sows inside such small crates that they are literally unable to turn around, not to mention walk or forage. The sows are kept in these cars day and night for 4 weeks after giving birth. The offspring are then taken away to the fattened up, and sows are impregnated with the next litter of piglets. Many dairy cows lived almost their allotted years inside a small enclosure, standing, sitting, and sleeping in their own urine and excrement. They receive their measure of food, hormones, and medication from one set of machines, and they get milked every few hours by another set of machines. The cow in the middle is treated as a little more than a month that takes in raw material and an adult that produces a commodity. Treating living creatures possessing complex emotional world as if they were machines is likely to cause them not only physical discomfort but also much social stress and psychological frustration. The chicks on a conveyor belt is a commercial hatchery. Just as the Atlantic slave trade did not stem from hatred towards Africans, so the modern animal industry is not motivated by animosity. Animosity. Again, it is fueled by indifference. Most people who produce and consume egg, milk, and meat really stop to think about the fate of the chicken, cow, and pigs whose flesh and emissions they are eating. Those who do not think often argue that such animals are really little and different from machines, devoid of sensation and emotion, incapable of suffering. Ironically, the same scientific disciplines which shape our milk machines and egg machines have lately demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that mammals and birds have a complex sensory and emotional makeup. They not only feel physical pain but can also suffer from emotional distress. Evolutionary psychology maintains that emotional and social need of farm, world, and wild when they were essential for survival and reproduction. For example, a wild cow had to know how to form close relation with other cows and bulls, or else she could not survive and reproduce. In order to learn the necessary skills, evolution implanted in cows, as in young of all other social members, a strong desire to play, playing in the mammalian way of learning social behavior, and it implanted in them an even stronger desire to bond with other mothers, or bond with their mothers, whose milk and care was essential for survival. What happened if farmer now take a young calf, separate her from her mother, put her in a closed cage, give her food, water, and inoculation against diseases, and then, when she is old enough, inseminate her with bull sperm? From an objective perspective, this calf no longer needs either maternal bonding or playmates in order to survive and reproduce. But from a subjective perspective, the calf still feels a very strong urge to bond with her mother and to play with other calves. If these urges are not fulfilled, the calf suffers greatly. This is the basic lesson of evolutionary psychology. A need shaped in the wild continues to be felt subjectively even if it's no longer really necessary for survival and reproduction. The tragedy of industrial agriculture is that it takes great care of objective needs of animals while neglecting their subjective needs. The truth of this theory has been known as at least since the 1950s when the American psychologist Harry Harlow studied the development of monkeys. Harlow separated infant monkeys from their mothers several hours before birth. After birth, the monkeys were isolated inside cages and then raised by dummy mothers. In each cage, Harlow placed two dummy mothers. One was made of metal wires and was fitted with a milk bottle from with the infant monkey's could suck. The other was made of wood covered with cloth, which made it resemble a real monkey mother, but it provided the infant monkey with no material sustenance whatsoever. It was assumed that the infants would cling to the nourishing metal mother rather than to the barren cloth one. To Harlow's surprise, the infant monkey showed a marked preference for the cloth mother, spending most of their time with her. Oh. When the two mothers were placed in close proximity, the infants held on the cloth mother even while they were reaching over to suck milk from the metal mother. Harlow suspected that perhaps the infant did so because they were cold, so he fitted an electric bulb inside the wire mother which now radiated heat. Most of the monkeys, except for the very young ones, continued to prefer the cloth mother. Follow-up research showed that Harlow's orphan monkeys grew up to the emotionally disturbed even though when they had received all the nourishment they required. They never fitted into monkey society, had difficulties communicating with other monkeys, and suffered from high level of anxiety and aggression. The conclusion was inescapable. Monkeys must have psychological needs and desire to go beyond their material requirements, and if these are not fulfilled, they will suffer greatly. Harlow's infant monkeys prefer to spend their time in the hands of parent cloth mother because they were looking for an emotional bond and not only for the milk. In the following decades, numerous studies show that this conclusion applies not only to the monkeys but to other mammals as well as birds. At present, millions of farm animals were subjected to the same condition of Harlow's monkeys, as farmers routinely separate calves, kids, and other youngsters from their mother to be raised in isolation. Altogether, tens of billions of farm animals live today as a part of machines, mechanized assembly line, and about 50 billion of them are slaughtered annually. These industrial livestock methods have led to a sharp increase in agriculture production and in human food reserve. Together with the mechanization of plant cultivation, industrial animal husbandry is the basis for the entire modern society economic order. Before the industrialization of agriculture, most of the food produced in the fields and farms were wasted feeding peasants and farmyard animals. Only a small percentage was available to feed artisans, teachers, priests, and bureaucrats. Consequently, in almost all societies, peasants comprise more than 90% of the population. Following the industrialization of agriculture, a shrinking number of farmers were enough to feed a growing number of clerks and factory hands. Today in the United States, only 2% of the population makes a living from agriculture, yet this 2% produce enough not only to feed the entire US population but also to export surplus to the rest of the world. Without industrialization of agriculture, the urban industrial revolution and could never have taken place. There would not have been enough hands and brains to staff factories and offices. As those factories and offices absorbed the billion of hands and brains that were released from field work, they began pouring out an unprecedented avalanche of products. Humans now produce far more steel, manufacture much more clothing, and build many more structures than ever before. In addition, they produce a mind-boggling array of previously unimaginable goods such as light bulbs, mobile phones, cameras, and dishwashers. For the first time in human history, supply began to outstrip demand, and an entirely new problem was one: who is going to buy all this stuff? Oh, so what are animosity, the plight? So, what is the meaning of plight? The plight of exploited coal miners, a dangerous condition. Animosity, intense hatred. It's not motivated by intensity. Okay. Evolutionary psychology. Okay. Study the role of it. Okay. So yeah. Now we are concluding this book reading session by summarizing all the vocabs or all the new words we learned today. So yeah. For revision, right? Because revision is what makes a learning more retained. So whenever you learn something new, you need to retain it, and you need to know how to use it, and you need to know how you can retain more content in your brain, and how you can retain more amount of information in your brain. So yeah, revision is one of the most important part of the learning. Learning is waste if you do not go and revise the things, right? So vocabulary revision rest. Confiscate, to seize property or items by authority, to seize something. Meddled, to interfere with others. Abrogation, official repeal or cancellation of law. Insurgents, people who rebel against authority. Mortgage, property or pledged property as a loan security. As a piece of information, okay. Ambitious, strong desire for success. Despotic, cruel or oppressive exercise for absolute power. Ardent, intensely passionate. Encumbered, free from burdens. Credit crunch, economic condition of restricted lending and borrowing. Avaricious, extremely greedy for wealth. Okay. Prohibitive, okay, extremely costly, insatiable, impossible to satisfy. Abominable, horrible. Fly in the ointment. It's just like drawback. Fly in the ointment. Ointment. Aberration, unusual or unwelcome deviation from the norm. Reunion, uncontrolled or restrained something excessive. Hall, to stop something, right? Cacophony, sharing mixture of loud and pleasant sounds. Emanated, to come out and radiate. Pulverize, crush into powder, completely defeated. Ludicrous, absurd. Plight, or difficult, or unfortunate conditions. Animosity, deeply hostile and resentment. Thank you so much. Now we are ending this